All right, this is my second try. Hey there, I'm Charlotte Smith, and this is The Profitable Farm, and I'm also of 3 Cow Marketing. And today I'm going to be joined here just in a minute. I'm waiting for him to join us by Kevin Fort, and I'm actually going to see, okay, I think I need to do something here. Okay, I invited him, and sorry. You guys, I'm still figuring out my computer. Okay, great. Okay, so thanks you guys. So Kevin Fort is just about to come on camera. This is my fancy technology, so thanks for bearing with me while we make sure it works. And he should be here anyway. Oh, he's here. Hey, Kevin.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, so I can hear you just fine. Everything looks good. You sound good. So, and you came on faster than I expected with Facebook. Sometimes it's really slow. So I didn't do an introduction or anything. So everyone knows me, but why don't you take a minute and just introduce yourself? Tell us where you are. Tell us about your little urban farm, and then what you do, the reason you're here today.
Sure. So thanks for having me. My name's Kevin Fort with Regenerative Business Institute. I am a farmer at heart, so grew up here in Arizona around the Phoenix metropolitan area, and have spent majority of my life studying and working in the finance and accounting fields, but always a deep-rooted passion for agriculture, all things agriculture. My wife and I have traveled with our family to different parts of the globe, Japan, New Zealand, studying different parts of agriculture and what different models look like. For me, the realization in life came back to my role was really to work with farmers with my business, finance and accounting understanding and experience to help them build viable and profitable businesses. So that was one of the reasons that we started Regenerative Business Institute, was to be that link for farmers and ranchers and those involved in ag between the business and the finance industry and the farming and the ag community. Because I am in a metropolitan area, I obviously study urban agriculture systems. That ranges anything from hydroponic and aquaponic growing systems to just small-scale urbanized systems where you have very bio-intensive units, and we look at growing soil, animal health, or any ecological health within those systems. So
that's great.
So thanks.
Yeah, that's really great that you found your calling, that you love farming, but you feel called almost, it sounds like, to teach the business side of it to farmers, which I could tell from the post I put up last week that the interest in your topic is huge. Like, we need help, me included. So I wanted to briefly have you also, just a very basic, we talked about it on the phone yesterday, and you gave me a really great answer without your bias of being an accountant. What are your thoughts on whether farmers should have an accountant or not? Because I loved your answer.
So in our society, we're used to the idea that there's this thing called a CPA or an accountant, and this type of an accountant specializes in tax strategy. So I think for a lot of us, the approach with CPAs is kind of the approach with the dentist. We check in once a year around tax season. They kind of do a health check on the business. They may or may not offer some advice or some tips on where your business is at. But there is an entirely separate field of accounting apart from tax strategy, which a lot of CPAs tend to focus on. And that's where we come into play, is with the operational side of accounting. So in our business, we have a very proactive hands-on approach with our clients. We're monitoring daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending upon the client's needs. And that allows us to stay ahead of issues before we get to tax season. So it really comes down to what the business owner is looking at as far as what their desires are with the business. If they're looking for a tax shelter, then a lot of times just working with a tax strategist accountant to identify how to shelter certain assets or incomes is appropriate. But if you're really looking to really hone the profitability of your organization or drive new revenue lines, what is the appropriate capital structure if you're taking on debt for the organization? That's where an operational accountant comes into play and can offer that type of advice and work as your partner in that.
Okay, great, thanks. And for everyone watching, we're going to link to Kevin's page so you can read about the services he offers too. All right, so you mentioned in there profitability, which brings us to our topic today, and I want to pull it up. So we're going to talk about markup versus margin, and you have to keep this really simple for me because because I focus on the farm, and when I read your description on your website about markup versus margin, you mentioned algebra, and I'm thinking, wow, I was in high school, you know, more than 30 years ago, and I know we do little algebraic equations on the farm when we're figuring things out, but can you put in farmer speak, you know, someone who's out moving hay bales and milking cows, tell us what is markup versus margin and why is it important to us as
Certainly.
farmers?
So this might be a good time for your audience to grab a pen and paper if they want to write down. So I'll keep the formula real simple and the ideology behind it, even though it can kind of seem complex from my explanation. I think there is a really good way to explain it in simple terms. So when we're looking at business development, I kind of want to lay the foundation as to why it's important for a farmer or any business to look at the difference between markup and margin. So in the business development world, we focus on three things. Those three things starts with number one being controlling our costs. A lot of approaches in the business environment tend to be a focus on number three being first, which is increasing sales. But the steps that we look at are number one, controlling costs. Number two, monitoring pricing. And number three, increasing sales. This is a cyclical process that needs to go on throughout the life of the business. The markup versus margin concept that we're going to talk about today fits perfectly into number two. So we're going to assume that we've accomplished that first step and we've controlled our cost and we know what that is and we've identified. In a simple formulaic version, the difference between margin and markup is going to be how you calculate the markup of the price that you're going to ask from the client or from the customer. Most business owners tend to take the margin approach, meaning that let's assume that we have a product, let's say a chicken, a 5-pound whole bird that we're going to offer at $10. Our cost for this bird was $10. We're going to take it to market. If the farmer or the business owner is looking for a 30% margin on that product, typically what the calculation looks like is they'll take that $10 cost, they'll multiply it by a 30% markup in their mind, and they'll add that answer to the cost in order to come up with their price.
Which makes it a $13 chicken, or
$13 would be the asking price. Okay. So now, and this is where the confusion of markup versus margin comes in. Now we have a $13 price, a $10 cost, which is going to give us a $3 margin. When you calculate that out, when you divide the $3 of margin left over by the $13 asking price, you're actually going to come back to about a 26% profit margin. Okay, so where the farmer originally was thinking, I'm padding my price or padding my cost with a 30% markup, they're actually eroding away at that margin because the realization, once the math is done, is going to come back to 26%. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, I'm clear.
So that's the margin approach, and that is how a lot of businesses tend to establish their pricing, is through that concept. That's also where businesses tend to run into a lot of cash flow issues, because what they think their margin is usually not. They're undermarking their margin rates. So the proper way to calculate that, if we're really truly looking at keeping an integrity of 30% profit margin on our product, would be to look at the percentage of cost that we would need to have in order to realize the 30% profit margin. And this is where the algebra comes in. In simple terms, if we were to take our $10 chicken, we know that the $10 is our cost, and if we were to divide that by 70%, because we know that the $10 has to represent 70% of our price in order for us to have a 30% profit margin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you take 10 divided by 0.7?
7.
Okay.
And that's going to come up with around $14.20 if my math is correct.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, now we have a true profit margin of 30% when we subtract the $10 from our $14.20 asking price, leaving us with $4.20. The difference in the two calculation methods is going to be about $1.20 difference. So if we're looking at 500 to 1,000 birds for the average farmer, missing out on that $1.20 per bird can mean a very big difference in that flock.
Absolutely. So you mentioned 30%. Is that, you work with a lot of farmers, is that what you suggest we should be working with?
Industry standard for our gross margin is going to be in between 30 and 38%.
Okay, I'm guessing that's pretty low for the farmers in this group, you know. So we've got some work to do. When you're working with people, okay, so say someone in this group comes to you next week and says, you know, okay, I've been operating on this 20% margin. What do you do with them? How would you help us?
Well, the first place we start with is with the value proposition. So the reason we're going to start with the value proposition is because what we need to be able to do is tell our story. We need to identify what is it that makes our farm, our growing practices, our product special and unique in the eyes of our customers that we're targeting. And this is something that you speak to wonderfully in identifying that value proposition that's going to allow you to go out and have the conversation with your client base and help them understand the cost of production and why your pricing is what it is. I think a lot of times farmers tend to devalue the products and services that they offer to their community, and particularly their client base, because they're afraid that they're going to drive business away. Where I think if we start the conversation with a true understanding of what my value is through your eyes as the customer, typically the customer is going to justify the additional expense on that product or service. So that's where we would start. And then we're going to go back after we've identified and helped the farmer look at their value proposition, making sure they understand who their target segmentation is, where does that target segmentation spend their time, whether they're, you know, which social media outlets. They can certainly leverage a lot of what you're teaching with the email campaigns to go back, and then now you know who you should be talking to. Let's dive in and look at the cost of the cost structures of your business. Where are there inefficiencies, whether it's in feed management practices, whether it's rotational grazing practices, where are the areas where costs are eroding away? And then we can set that proper pricing strategy, and then we can go to market to increase those sales. And that's the proper process in order to drive higher profit margins that are going to ultimately lead to increased net profit, which net profit is money in our pockets.
Okay. Wow. This is a lot of info. I totally followed it. But I have some work to do on my farm too. Do you see, do you help when a farmer comes to you and you work with them, do you see them turn around, you know, like in a year, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years?
Yes, we do. So we've had several clients this year who have contacted us with severe cash flow issues. We've put them into our programming, which is it's an intensive monitoring program where we not only do site visits on the farm, we take on an active role in bookkeeping. I think you had one question on the feed. Somebody was asking how does an external party actually book my expenses properly? So an answer to that question would be through the chart of accounts. We would work with that person to identify within the chart of accounts what they want to track on their farm, and then when they're tracking or submitting a receipt to be recorded in the books, they would essentially identify it needs to be recorded to this account. So there are those types of strategies. But yes, our process is we work intensively with the farmers to identify and control those costs. We look at those operational efficiencies and we work as a side-by-side partner.
You know what, it really sounds great is there's some accountability there. Like on my farm, I have an accountant who I sit down with a couple times a year, but otherwise I'm accountable to no one. But you guys, this sounds really encouraging. You offer a lot of accountability along with the advice, don't you? I'll bet that's as important as the advice you offer, right?
One of the first things I explain to clients when they come on board is this is going to be a little painful at the start because we are going to hold you accountable. But I'm confident that you'll be appreciative and realize the value in it when we get to the other side of this.
Yeah, you probably have to say no and tell them, nope, you can't buy that. You need to do this.
It does happen, yes.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. I love this service. I've not talked to anyone who does this in the farming world specifically, so I think it's wonderful. Can we answer a few more of these questions in here too that people asked?
Absolutely.
Okay, we've been on for about 20 minutes, so we'll take a few more minutes. You already mentioned, you answered one question. It's totally possible to train an outside person to do your bookkeeping and handle that. We have a lot of people starting out in here. It's their first year of business and they're trying to get set up. So are there specific things they should be doing with their finances? For instance, this person has been paying for feed out of their personal account. So yeah, what should we, if we're in our first year or two of business, what should we be getting set up with financially?
So there are SaaS, software as a service based programs out there that will handle bookkeeping for as little as $9 a month. And trust me, I have been in 4 different startup companies now, and I know sometimes $9 a month can be a stretch for a startup company. But for the value that you can get in the information that you're able to record and really get a holistic view, startups, it's incredibly important for a startup to be able to track and monitor what is happening financially in order for you to get past that first 12 to 24 months of operations. So for $9 a month with a program like Xero, or QuickBooks Online has an inexpensive version. It usually will not include things like payroll, but that's fine for a startup company. It's going to introduce you to the chart of accounts, and that's where accounting starts, is within the chart of accounts and identifying what revenue accounts, what cost of goods accounts, and what expense accounts you're going to be tracking. And you slowly learn the process of how money moves from your profit and loss statement over to your balance sheet.
Okay, this is great. I'm gonna make a list of the tools you're mentioning here for people as well. So I'm gonna ask another. You just mentioned, someone said whether to use accounting software, and so that would fall into what you just talked about, that SaaS, right? Okay.
Yes.
One question was, are you required to claim assets? How can you apply assets to cow shares? Is this too complicated, or can you answer that in the?
It is complicated. I'm certainly willing to answer the question, but that might be more appropriate in a written response so that I can explain. It's important for farmers to understand that in the eyes of the IRS, and really in the eyes of any operational accountant, that a farm is no different than a factory, a manufacturing factory. So the assets and how you book and record those things is often treated the same. So yeah, if they're willing to be patient, I will be more than happy to write out a written response on how they want to treat and record those assets.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll do a guest blog post if you want to answer that in a written response, and we could post it for everyone's benefit too.
Certainly.
So cool, good. And then, so let's see, other than an LLC, are there other ways you recommend that someone register their farm? Like, again, probably changes over time.
It can change over time. So there's 4 main structures that you are primarily looking at when you're looking at a legal entity for a farm, and that's going to be a sole proprietorship, an LLC or a limited liability company, an S Corp or a C Corp. I typically don't recommend the latter 2, S Corps or C Corps, until the farm has gone over $1 million in revenue and usually managing more than $1 million in net worth. And if they're balancing partnerships and things like that, then there's typically cause for going to that level of expense and documentation. So it is very expensive to manage and time management or time encumbering to manage a corporation. Between a sole proprietorship and an LLC, really what you're looking at or asking yourself is protection questions. So with a sole proprietorship, it's very inexpensive and very easy. You're typically just going to file a Schedule F for your reporting requirements on a sole proprietorship. But your personal assets may be exposed to litigation and risk should somebody decide to file suit. An LLC can help provide a buffer against that. So in cases where gross negligence is not a case, limited liability companies tend to provide a reasonable amount of protection against personal assets. So if somebody was to file a claim and be awarded, they can't take your home or personal assets that aren't a part of the LLC.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
That was very concrete, because I always wondered, giving that $1 million in sales and assets was a very concrete answer, because I knew at some point you should switch over. I didn't know where. So thanks. I think that'll help everyone. I wonder if a lot of people, I know you're not an attorney, but a lot of people think an LLC protects them from everything. Like me, a raw milk dairy, I have raw milk liability insurance that would protect me. How much does an LLC protect you?
It's going to vary by state. And again, I'm not an attorney, but LLCs, it's all up to the state and the state's laws that surround the business and business entity and legal structures. There's a wonderful precedence throughout the nation that the courts have recognized LLCs as an entity separate to and from the owners or the proprietors of the business. Again, I think from a precedent state in legal terms, it really just comes down to, was gross negligence a part of the equation? And if it's not, they usually provide a really reasonable amount of protection against personal assets.
Okay. And they're fairly inexpensive. My LLC isn't that cost prohibitive. So it seems like a good way to go. Okay.
Correct. And I think in the state of Arizona, attorneys are charging between $400 and $500 to set them up. If you're comfortable with navigating the legal system yourself, you can set them up for $75 filing fees here in Arizona.
Great. Good. Okay. So just maybe one more question. I think actually we answered most of the questions, although I know people have hundreds more, so we'll have to do another interview or blog post or something. So to wrap it up, what should we be, knowing that April 15th is right around the corner? What are the things, like the biggest, most important things you see farmers forgetting to do, or what should we be doing right now?
That's a great question, because we're going through that with our clients now, and that's goal setting. So it's really being able to set out the difference between the daily whirlwind, that mass confusion that surrounds us and eats up a majority of our time, and oftentimes hinders us from our ability to drive our operations and that vision that we hold in our heads. So I think this time of year is not only a great time to sit back and review your financials, your operating performance, and kind of get a clear picture of where you've been, but then start to set goals. Are we looking to launch a new revenue line? Are we looking to just refine efficiencies? Or what is that goal that we're really after for this year? And then we go through a process called 40X within our organization, the 4 disciplines of execution, where we help quantify and allocate a certain percentage of time to accomplishing those goals versus dealing with the daily whirlwinds that we experience on our farms and ranches.
Yeah, and it's just like marketing. I'm sure marketing and finances are left after the whirlwind, and the whirlwind is never ending. If it's not too hot, now it's too cold and pipes are breaking, and it seems like everything's a priority, but the goal setting and the marketing and all that. So it's, I guess, just being intentional about addressing it on a regular basis is really important. And
yes,
having someone like you or your company to be accountable to, that makes sure it happens, more likely to happen too, I'm sure.
Yes, that's what we try to be.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, let me make sure. Okay, so Serena is one of our marketing students. She asked on Facebook, multiple versus single member LLC, which is better?
So that might be a conversation that she's going to want to have with a business attorney in her state, because again, LLCs are susceptible to state law. And without knowing where she's at, that can be a difficult question. I will say, so there are certain benefits when you're looking at, primary or majority women-owned or minority-owned businesses. There can be incentives from different programs and agencies there. Multiple versus single-member LLC, which is better, is how good is your partnership? So business partnerships are as complex as marriages can be. So it's really important when you're going into those situations to make sure there are no unclear or undefined expectations within that relationship. And always have an exit strategy. So there's no benefit to having more than one person listed on the LLC other than continuation of operations, depending upon the exit strategy of the business. So other than that, other than to keep it from getting too complicated, I would probably suggest that she has a conversation with a local business attorney.
Okay, great. All right, I know Serena will get that. Okay, well, Kevin, we've been on for about 30 minutes, which is perfect. So I just really want to thank you. You've given so much advice today. I'm going to turn this into a blog post. The video will be in the blog post and I'll get it out. So it'll go out to a lot more farmers too. But thank you. I really appreciate you being here and just taking the time. And we will send people to you if they want to look into working with you. Sounds great to me to have someone I have to be accountable to besides myself. I know my husband would like that too.
Well, we're happy to help.
Yeah, good. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure, no problem. Bye-bye.
Bye, Charlotte.